All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Picture yourself in the flight deck of a Bombardier Q400. You are on final approach. Your gear is down, you're fully configured, and you are fully expecting to land. But what happens when you suddenly can't? Today, we're unpacking a critical aviation safety guideline about a really concerning trend: go-around maneuvers going completely wrong. We're going to pull directly from the source material to give you the exact tools and tricks you need to handle this procedure flawlessly.
Here is our roadmap. We're going to breeze through the trend itself, the reasons for a go-around, the aircraft and pilot states, task sharing, pitch and power, and finally, your mental preparation. Starting right off with Section 1, the go-around trend, and those uncontrolled risks. Listen, the severity here is no joke. The safety guidelines explicitly highlight a noticeable and frankly scary trend of go-arounds being botched. And a wrongly executed go-around isn't just a tiny bump in the road, right? It directly leads to flight exceedances and totally uncontrolled flight paths. It is a massive safety risk. So really grasping this specific phase of flight is absolutely mandatory if we want to keep the aircraft safely inside its permissible envelope. Moving right along to Section 2, the reasons for go-arounds, or the triggers. Okay, imagine you're flying that Q400. You're locked in. But if literally any of these 5 things happen, you have to instantly call off the landing. Number 1, you don't see the runway at minimums. 2, you realize you're flying an unstabilized approach. 3, there is a sudden traffic conflict on the active runway. 4, ATC flat out advises you to go around. And 5, miscellaneous stuff, which is usually a sudden, nasty weather shift. You've got to memorize these 5 triggers, because the second one of them pops up, your decision is already made for you. All right, Section 3, aircraft and pilot states, and the friction between them. This right here is exactly why a go-around is so incredibly tough. Just look at the contrast. On one hand, your Q400 is basically in its most vulnerable state. High drag, low energy, gear down, flaps down. On the other hand, you've got the pilot. You're super stressed, you weren't expecting this, you might be at the end of a really long duty period, fuel could be low, the ground is right there, and suddenly the radio is blowing up with traffic. It literally feels like a failure of an expected landing. It's the ultimate friction between a low-energy machine and a highly stressed human. Which brings us to Section 4, priorities and task sharing. So, how do we fix that high-stress chaos? The guidelines give us crystal clear priorities. And here is a super easy trick to lock it in: the ANC memory trick. Aviate, navigate, communicate. Aviate is always number 1. Controlling the aircraft and getting it safely away from the dirt is your absolute top priority. Seriously, ignore the radio, don't stress over the perfect heading just yet. Fly the airplane first. Once we are actually aviating, it's all about crew resource management, or CRM. This has to be deliberately briefed and trained. Usually, the pilot in command takes over the controls here, and the division of labor is super strict. The pilot flying sets the power and adjusts the pitch, period. The pilot monitoring, they are watching altitude, vertical speed, airspeed, and configuration like a hawk, calling out anything that's off. The source material warns us that if these specific duties break down, your situational awareness just totally tanks. Now for the pilot monitoring, the guidelines give us an awesome instrument scan sequence. Here is your next trick to remember it effortlessly: the PAS scan. PAAS. Power, attitude, altitude, speed. If you are the PM in the right seat of that Q400, you have to run that PAS scan relentlessly to keep the flying pilot honest and the plane perfectly within its limits. Next up, Section 5, pitch, power, and action. That mental shift. This is all about what happens in your head. The split second that go-around is decided, you have to completely shift your brain from landing mode to climbing mode. You are not landing anymore. The guidelines explicitly tell us that messing up pitch and power right here, especially with sloppy CRM, is the absolute leading factor in busting your flap speeds or blowing completely through your assigned go-around altitude. Which leads to a really great question, one that trips up pilots in the simulator and the real world all the time. Do you always need full power for a go-around? Well, actually, no. The guidelines are super specific about this. If you start a go-around from a higher altitude, slamming the throttles to full power can actually cause a pretty dangerous speed exceedance, especially with those massive engines on the Q400. You really only need enough power for a gentle climb. Proper power management is key. Plus, use your automation. You don't always need to smash the go-around button if you've got the altitude for it. Keeping the autopilot engaged might actually be the smoothest, safest move you can make. Finally,
Section 6, Preparation, Conclusion, and Your Mindset.
The ultimate defensive strategy boils down to one simple phrase: expect a go-around on every approach. You need to absorb this and make it your permanent mental default. The source text says this needs to be deliberately briefed as an element of every approach based on your company SOP. And I mean deliberately briefed, not just mumbled through like a script while you're staring out the window.
So let's wrap this all up. A go-around is rare, absolutely, but it's one of the most highly critical things you will do in your activity cycle. It demands deliberate training because it can hit you even when an approach looks completely flawless. But listen, if you stick to those memory tricks, using ANC to aviate first, and that relentless PAS scan for your CRM, your Q400 is going to safely climb away from the ground every single time. I want to leave you with a provocative thought straight from the reality of the line. If a go-around can be triggered at literally any second, even from a perfectly stable, beautifully flown approach, are you truly prepared for the unexpected? Because aviation safety is 100% about being ready for exactly what you least expect. Take these guidelines, use your ANC and pause tricks on your next flight, and always stay one step ahead of the airplane.